Hi, welcome back. So I'm Paul Hargreaves again here with Doss and Tami Bradford, and they are some experts just from the standpoint they've been doing 13 years plus of teaching, plus parenting, and if I was actually trying to think of being a parent out there. I am a parent, but my daughters are grown, 3 grown daughters. But I'm thinking, what would it be like if I am already, if all of a sudden I'm told I am the teacher, primary teacher of my children, and how is that going to look? So in this segment here, we're going to be really talking about the space that you're going to create at home, and then some procedures and some routines that you can create there in your learning space at home. So Doss, if you can first kind of start us off with talking about the space, and then a little bit later routines and procedures.
Yeah. My background is a little bit in engineering, a little bit in architecture, a little bit in design features. So for me, the idea of the space that you work in is incredibly important, because I think the way that your space is set up really influences your productivity and how you go about learning. So one of the things that was really important for me as a teacher is I will go into school a couple of weeks prior, setting up the classroom, and I'll even go ahead and stand in front of the classroom thinking about how a student will walk in and see the chalkboard or the calendar, and how the student will walk from one edge of the room to the other with other students within there. And that's one of the things that's really changed, is we will not have a classroom in this online schooling.
Right.
It's going to be wherever you're teaching your child. And setting that up and taking some really purposeful focus on how is your student going to have a place to learn, I think is important. One of the things that's I think is a challenge, and is coming back from last year that I talked to a lot of students, is a lot of the students' frustrations were they were sitting on their bed trying to do whatever assignments we were trying to give them. And I think personally that's setting students up almost for a way to fail when you go about it.
Because you need to create a space that's different.
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that we've worked really hard in our family to do, and I'm thankful that we've done that, is like our bedrooms are our relaxation spot.
Okay.
Like we don't have devices, we don't have any TVs, and I know every family has their own philosophy on that and what that looks like, but we wanted like their bed, even just like that space, to physically represent that. And we were talking a lot about the fact that when you lay down to rest, if that's also your workplace, it's really hard to let go of that work when you're trying to rest at night. And so even ideally, I would say both of us would recommend not having a workspace in a bedroom.
Definitely.
Because that should be their like, let down space.
If it can be avoided.
If it can be avoided. But if it has to be in a bedroom, having one specific chair or one specific location that's not the bed that they can sit on and or be at, that's their learning space, so that they can, again, physically separate when they're trying to let go of everything from the day in the bed. They're not also, it seems nuanced, but there's an element of where you just hold on to that work. And we do that when we bring our phones into bed with us. You know, if we communicate for work, we bring them into bed, it's a lot harder to fall asleep. And I think we would want to avoid that for students.
Some of that difficulty is just because they're in the habit of school space being separate, and they're at school, and it looks a certain way. And you talked about creating that space at school, and that's what the kids are used to. So. Right. It's basically, it sounds like, you're creating something that's different, like school's different, at home.
Yeah.
Before I became a teacher, I actually worked remotely for about 7 years. And that transition of being in an office to working in a one-bedroom apartment was a really big change for me. And it took me a long time to kind of establish some procedures, such as having a desk that was only for work, having all my supplies at that desk that were only for work. If I wanted a pair of scissors, there were my work scissors, and then there were my home scissors.
Oh, interesting.
And by keeping that separate, it was a lot easier for me to go ahead and say, I'm at work, now I'm at home. The other thing that I found was very beneficial for me was when I was alone a lot of times, I needed to get work done. There was a time for that, but also it benefited me to be around other people who were also working. So there were a couple of places around where I lived, like cafes that I would go to, and there were other people who would bring their work there and have coffee. And I'd go there often when I really needed to focus, because everybody else was working around me too. So I was kind of in that work mindset. So
Yeah.
a lot of times having multiple students in the same room who are focusing, if you have multiple kids, can actually be a benefit.
Yeah, especially if, I mean, at school they do it all the time. At home it's a little harder because it's their siblings.
Right.
Or maybe a neighbor. And so it's still, that kind of goes now into that routine of how do we treat our siblings like classmates instead of
Right.
like siblings during the day. And we ran into that problem, actually, I would say. Our son really wanted to help our daughter with all of her learning, and that was kind of became a problem because he wasn't doing his own things. So we had to create that physical space and that routine for him. And I would say, if we're talking about space as well, one really powerful way to create space for a kid to feel like they're focused on their work is actually a set of headphones.
Definitely.
That's something that I would really highly recommend. Not only does it cut down on all of the sound in the house, if you have all of these kids doing videos and interactions, it creates them having that space. And when we set that up for our son, they were both sitting at the table for a while, and then we had to move him to a place where he was facing the wall. And every kid's different, as we were talking about, So once he was facing the wall, he could also have his headphones on, and he could also listen to music that created that space. It kind of makes me think of like when you're on the subway and you don't want people to talk to you kind of space, that like it gives you that like your own personal bubble. So even as something as simple as a set of headphones and facing a wall can make that space for you.
To go with that, I mean, supplies I think are really important with that. Every school should have a supply list, and we actually went supply shopping.
Yeah,
with our
and I know a
kids.
lot of schools are also handing them out too, so it's not.
So
something
having
you
them in a
have to
central
provide.
location so they're readily and easily accessible, and you're not kind of grabbing them from other people or going and grabbing them out of a separate drawer. But when it's ready to do, you have it and it's ready to go.
So maybe one of your children has their space here in a room, another of your children somewhere else have a central place for their.
Yep,
That's a
they
great
always
idea.
return it.
It could be as simple as just have a pencil box where everything goes in here, and that's where you go. With
I even actually recreated in an elementary classroom, you often have two cups, one with sharp pencils and one with dull.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, someone sharpens all the dull pencils as a part of their classroom job. And I thought this would actually be really helpful at home to do. But this also kind of, I feel like, starts getting into that routine idea. And something that we as teachers know is it takes about 6 weeks to get into a school routine for them when they're coming into the classroom.
I'd say that's any age group.
And that doesn't matter.
Even as a high school student, I don't feel that we really get into the meat of the learning until after the first 6 weeks of school.
Yeah, it takes a long time. And I feel like as parents, we feel like, we just taught you this yesterday. You should know how to do it. But when you're transitioning into that from summer, and especially from distance learning last year, when it's like everything was in disarray, like give yourself grace as a parent to understand that, like, even as teachers, as trained professionals, we take 6 weeks of where do our scissors go? How do we treat these supplies? Where do they go at the end of the day? What's our cleanup procedure? How do we line up at the end of the day? And really, it's not until that 6th week where all of those routines and procedures are in place and you're not fighting with these routines and procedures as much.
Right.
That doesn't mean you don't remind them because, oh my goodness,
still comes.
how many high schoolers don't come without their pencils? We don't want to even talk about that because that's just reality. But there is this general set routine of like, when does school start? And it always starts that way. And there's always going to be a bit of a fight on how you do that. And at school, we have the bonus of peer pressure.
Right,
and by peer pressure, I mean positive peer pressure. Everybody else is doing it. We're all here together. At home, they're still looking at you as like, oh, this is our safe place home and our relaxed space. And so that's where that other space comes into play.
So a lot of teachers put a schedule on their board for a reason, and that's something you should do as well. Is maybe have on the wall. There's a schedule. There's a certain routine that you're
building
following.
in those breaks for like that 25-5 we were talking about. I mean, for kindergarten, it's really more like 7 and 2 or 7 and 3. For high school, it might be 25 minutes
it's an
and
actual
5.
technique. It's called the Pomodoro technique. And if you look it up, you'll find tons of information, even apps that'll help you do it. But it's the idea of you're sitting down for 25 minutes, you are going to focus, no other things are going to be coming into the way. And then once that 25 minutes is over, you've got a 5-minute break to do whatever you want, get a drink of water, go ahead and sharpen your pencil, relax, check your Instagram if that's important to you. And then at the end of that 5 minutes, which you also have a timer on, you go back and you repeat it again.
For younger kids, it's recess. For older, it's check your phone for a text or something.
Or it's passing in the halls.
Yeah.
Call your friend.
All right. Well, so this
So
has
much
been
more.
great. There's so much more, actually, as we just said, that we could talk about. But here's the thing: is again, you might write down your questions, and we'll have a question and answer time in a week from this video segment, and we hope to see you back then.